Greetings, friends, foes, fiends, and welcome to this episode of the Passing Through podcast. This week is a special treat. We have Robert Falconer passing through. He is the author of the book, The Others Within Us. Bob has a long list of accolades. His psychotherapeutic pedigree is absolutely prodigious. He studied with Marshall Rosenberg of nonviolent communication fame. He has studied with Carol Erickson and is certified in Ericksonian hypnotherapy. He studied with Jack and Helen Watkins, the creators of ego state therapy. He was executive director of the Institute for Trauma Oriented Psychotherapy for a decade. He's worked in IFS for over a decade. He even spent time back in Esalen in the 70s. He has an impressive wealth of anthropological knowledge, and it was a real honor to sit down and speak with him. We talk about psychotherapy, IFS, the porosity of mind, unattached burdens, spirit presence experiences, DMT entities, psychedelics, spiritual healing, and a whole bunch of other things, and I think you're going to love it. So we're just going to jump right in this week, but first, I just want to advise you to please check out Bob's book, The Others Within Us. It has been one of the most enjoyable and fascinating books I've read in a long time, maybe ever. And if you feel so inclined to take his upcoming workshop on IFS-based psychedelic trip sitting, which is starting in April on the 20th, you can find him at his website, robertfalconer.us. And all of the links that you'll need to find Bob will be in the show notes. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. And if you're enjoying this show, even if you're not enjoying this show, go to Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts and give it a like. And one more thing before I forget, as part of your episodic incentive to contribute positively to the environment, I want to encourage you to buy organic clothing. If you can, go to a thrift store and buy clothing. If you could avoid participating in fast fashion, that would be really nice. But if you can't, buy organic. Because when you buy clothing made of synthetic materials that contain microplastics, when you wash your clothes, these things get into the water supply, they get into the oceans, and they cause considerable damage. We don't even understand the full extent of the damage that these microplastics and more recently nanoplastics were discovered in the ocean. And what we know about nanoplastics is that they are capable of penetrating deeper into cellular tissue, and I believe they're even capable of crossing the blood-brain barrier, which is pretty scary to think about plastic in your brain. So if you don't want to contribute to that, buy organic fabrics and things that don't contain synthetic materials made from plastic. Okay. So, Bob, I want to thank you for sitting down and taking the time with me today. It's truly a gift to have you on. I am a big fan of your work. Your book, The Others Within Us, has been a deeply illuminating read for me. I can't stop talking about it. I find your personal story very inspirational, and I see you as a real force for good in the world. So while I know that you don't consider yourself a shaman, I see you as a shaman of sorts, or at least a kind of shamanic activist, because through your work, through stepping into these mystical realms with clients and putting in the time and doing the research and writing this book, you help raise awareness and you help challenge outdated materialist paradigms that we find ourselves steeped in Western culture. So thank you for all you do and for helping to reduce human suffering. It's sincerely a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. I hope I can live up to your introduction.
So to start us off, the first question that I had is around elderhood. Elderhood is a topic that's been coming up a lot in my circles. And it seems that we have plenty of elderly people around, but few real elders. And what I mean by elders are those people who, with their insights and their wisdom, they're able to offer valuable guidance and teachings. And in my estimation, you are one of those elders. So when you look around, I'm very curious to know what you think is most urgently needed by humanity right now.
Oh,
Starting off with an easy one.
You look around the world right now, it's a chorus of screams. I mean, it's hard not to see urgent needs in every direction. And I don't have those big frame answers, really. I could come up with some bullshit, but what I know is what I think I can make a difference working on. And I have a certain quite limited skill set, focus, 50 years of learning this one area, and I can maybe make a difference there and reduce human suffering there. And I just try and stay with that kind of focus as opposed to solutions for the world. I think bigger picture, our quote rationalist materialist worldview is a disaster, and it's poisoning us horribly.
Mm-hmm.
And that needs to shift. And we have exiled spirit from Western culture. That's a disaster. It's destroying us. So those are the areas where, I think maybe I can make a difference in a few people's lives.
Okay, so it's kind of tend to the part of the garden that you can reach.
Yeah.
That leads me a bit into the next question, actually, because there is a trend in the modern era, as you just alluded to, where we've exalted the individual at the expense of the communal. And we seem to have stamped out these folk and indigenous traditions in favor of these Eurocentric, mechanistic traditions. So now in the West, as we have this renewed interest in aspects of these folk traditions, is there danger in kind of unpracticed hands, opening these doors and inviting in energies without the knowledge and wisdoms of the cultures that we're extracting them from?
Well, because human life is dangerous. Every pathway you take has a lot of dangers. Remaining ignorant with your blinders on and your blindness to all of these other realities is more dangerous than opening the doors.
Yeah. So it's better in that sense to go in and try to make a difference and try to heal and learn and get back to this place instead of avoiding it, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was wondering, as we get into your book here and as we talk about IFS a bit, I was wondering if you'd be interested in sharing a bit about your own personal journey, because to me, it's a really incredible testament to the power, not just of IFS as a psychotherapeutic modality, but also the resilience of the human spirit. So if you'd be interested to share that.
Sure. Yeah. I come from a truly horrible family. I think the word evil would be appropriate. Both my parents, it was church going. It looked pretty good from the outside if you didn't get close. Both my parents were addicts, alcoholic, mom prescription drug, dad really a hardcore alcoholic. And he also was a child molester, molested me and my brother, had his male gay lover, child molester friends living in the house with the family. So there were multiple adults molesting us. Mom molested us too. My brother committed suicide when we were teenagers. Mom was in and out of several mental institutions throughout her life. Dad was murdered when I was 21, early 20s anyway. And I was on the direct road to hell myself. Alcohol, severe drinking in high school, and which got derailed when I ran into LSD. Since that time, the prognosis for someone like me is early death, prison, life in a dumpster, or heavy psychiatric meds, wandering around being a vegetable. And by the grace of spirit, I have, and really hard work. I do work hard. I do my homework. I've not gone down that path. And I've focused pretty much my whole life on my own healing and helping other men with histories like mine heal, and then men and women. And I've studied many, many, many healing modalities. They're mostly all parts work modalities. IFS, I think, is the most potent and most respectful. And I think it is potent because it is respectful. We tend to think of respectful people as being maybe weak or something. I think that's exactly backwards, 180 degrees backwards, because IFS is so respectful of the independence and autonomy of all the parts. It gives it a tremendous power in the inner world. I think healing from trauma like mine requires a spiritual basis. I think healing from any major healing, I think, requires a spiritual basis. And astoundingly, saying stuff like that gets me in a lot of trouble. I mean, you can talk about sex and all sorts of stuff, but talk about spirit, oh, bad boy.
Yes, that's a sad truth. But why do you think it is, though, that a spiritual element is needed for that kind of healing?
Okay, well, it depends on how you define spirit. Spiritual to me means whatever's the deepest orientation in your life, whatever provides meaning. Life is full of overwhelming suffering. With me, I got huge doses of it right at the start. You have to find something so meaningful, so valuable that it makes that suffering worthwhile. That's spirituality. Viktor Frankl, who is great and doesn't get as much attention as he deserved, talked about who survived in the concentration camps where he was locked up. He said, people who could make meaning out of their existence survived. Those who couldn't find a way to make meaning died. And in the camps, he said, we could tell. We'd know if somebody lost their ability to find meaning in life. We could sense that in them, and they'd be dead in a couple days. So this idea of a spiritual depth, meaning, some kind of overarching value, it's not icing on the cake after the cake's baked. It determines who lives and who dies. So that's why I think it requires a spiritual basis.
A part of IFS that I like that you reference in your book is that it's a constraint release model.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think it kind of relates to this, where maybe at the core of who we are, this deep sense of meaning is an aspect of self. Or
yeah, I think the deep sense of meaning is something we achieve. You can't give it to another person. You can't create it for someone else, and it changes moment by moment. It's like if you ask somebody what's the meaning of life, that's like asking what's the best move in a chess game. It changes all the time. It's not constant. It has to change. So this idea of constraint release is very, very important, especially to people like me with big trauma histories. I was told all the early healing I did, you didn't get the early attachment stuff you need. You're going to have a miserable life. Take a lot of meds. Don't have any big ambition. You're damaged goods. Sorry, but you're a psychological cripple. And Dick comes along and he says, your self is there. It's got all these burdens on it. When we remove all those burdens, all these constraints, your self is there like the sun after a big storm. Doesn't matter how big the storm was, blew down your house, the roads are gone, floods. When the clouds go back, the sun is there. It is undamaged and it is not even dirty. And that's who you are. That was an incredibly powerful message for me and for men like me with histories like mine. They'd always been told, no, you're garbage. Sorry. So that idea of, no, these are burdens, we can get them off you, and who you are at your core is still that shining sun. Very, very important.
Yeah, it's very powerful, very empowering and reassuring. It reminds me of that famous Rumi quote. You probably know it, that your task is not to seek love, but to look inside yourself and find all of the barriers that you've built against it.
Yeah. There's a name for this in theology. They call it kenotic. And there are kenotic or kenosis in every religion, where they talk about the way to find God or contact with the divine is just getting the junk out of the way. And Dick doesn't like this, but He is the heir to a thousands of year old spiritual tradition. He sort of wants to be new and scientific and all of that. But no, sorry, this is at least 3,000-year-old spiritual tradition. And there's another name for it in theology, which is apophaticism. I like big words. Apophaticism, technically, it means defining God by saying what God is not. Any word God is great. Well, great's too small a word. So you say God is not this, not that. That's the same idea as constraint release, right? You're just taking away everything that's in the way. And that's how you reveal the self in its splendor. That's how you reveal the divine. That's how you meet spirit. Zen Buddhism has a lot of this. Every spiritual tradition has kenotic elements.
As you were speaking, I had an idea or a question that maybe, I don't know if you've given any thought to this, but what role do you think silence plays in that process? Because for me, meditation lately and silence are a recurring theme. And I wonder if that resonates at all with you, if silence and stillness are important in this process.
Very much. Be still and know that I am God. Quit running your mouth. I'm right here. Yeah, very, very much so.
I want to jump into the book because I was just kind of doing a little bit of preamble to get people accustomed to the stuff that we'll be talking about, because I think in the modern dominant Western scientific materialist worldview, when people start hearing talk about energies and spirits, they have this immediate knee-jerk reaction of skepticism or outright dismissal or ridicule.
Ridicule. I get a lot of that.
Yes, I could imagine.
It's a good thing I'm old and that I don't need to make a living anymore. I could retire if I wanted to, and I don't care about position and all of that, because this is not a career-enhancing move. I want to talk about, Dick really didn't like that I put spirit possession in the subtitle of the book. And my undergraduate and a little bit of graduate work in anthropology on spirit possession is a totally respectable thing to study there, but it only happens in little brown people on the other side of the planet. It's like incredibly racist, the attitudes we have in sort of a reverse way. But yes. I just want, if you think about it this way, I think it makes a lot more sense. There is a basic biopsychological dynamic that occurs in pretty much every culture on the planet we have records of. It's one of the most widely spread things. It can have profound effects for good and for bad on people. The metaphor usually used to describe this is spirit possession. But whatever it is, it deserves our study. It's all over the place. It destroys people and it changes their lives for the good. So why wouldn't we study it? Prejudice, blindness, and a lot of other stupid reasons.
Yeah, but I totally, completely agree. And what I loved about the book is how accessible it is, but also how thoroughly rigorous it is. How it's written very articulately and personally and persuasively, and it's well researched, and you have all the data to back it up. I'm curious, how has it been received by the wider academic community since publication?
I don't really have an idea about that stuff. I live on my mountainside here outside of Santa Cruz, California. I do my work, and I don't think they pay attention. Mm-hmm. I mean, even in the IFS community, a lot of people distance themselves from me and my work.
That's unfortunate.
I got a letter from a lead trainer saying how wonderful my book was, and she liked this, and this, and the research. And I said, "Oh, can I quote you with your name or without?" And she said, "Let me think about it." And she got back to me a month later and said, "No, I don't want you doing that. I need to be on good terms with the Institute."
Interesting.
So even in the IFS world,
there's still some stigma.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's okay. I don't mind. I grew up when I'm old. I grew up when the psychotherapeutic world denied the reality of childhood sexual abuse. That is not that long ago. There was a textbook of psychiatry published in the late 1960s that said incest is vanishingly rare, less than 1 in a million families, and when it does happen, it's often good for the child. Yeah, it's like, huh?
That's astonishing.
And when the people who started talking about child sexual abuse were a bunch of women who were not therapists. It was a writing teacher, a poet. And then here in Santa Cruz, amazingly, this one therapist opened up this tiny little storefront service provider called Survivors Healing Center. And all the major therapy authorities tried to shut him down and shut him up. And these conferences were organized on a grassroots basis. That's how it came up. And the authorities, the big experts went, oh, no. So I have a very healthy skepticism of the experts. Same thing with PTSD. We forget this. PTSD was denied by all the experts. All the experts. The only reason it got into the DSM, the Bible of diagnosis in America, was because a bunch of Vietnam veterans rap groups knew this stuff happened. And they went to Washington, D.C., and they had an organized lobbying campaign, and the government forced the academics to accept the reality of PTSD if they wanted to continue to get government funding, which they definitely wanted. And I'm so grateful they've, recognized this. And I know this is a snarky part of me, and it's not my best part, but it would really be nice if they said, gee, we're sorry we were so wrong for so long. That ain't happening. Now, all the same institutions that were saying this is all garbage are now going, well, we're the big trauma experts. And blah, 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 blah. So.
Yeah, it's funny how that works.
Schopenhauer said something I love. He said, all new ideas progress in 3 ways. First, they're ridiculed and laughed at. Second, they're argued against vehemently. Third, they're accepted as self-evident.
Yes, I've always loved that quote. That's one thing that actually I really enjoy about the book. It's full of really brilliant, perfectly cherry-picked quotes. You seem to have a wealth of knowledge around when to use the right quote.
Oh, thank you. The new book, which I've got coming out in 2 months, maybe less, is all quotes. Because I've been collecting quotes for 50 years or more.
Oh, wow.
Because I find them very, very helpful in healing. They often encapsulate a whole bunch of stuff in a very succinct form.
Yes.
So that I can actually use it in real time.
Wow, that's amazing. So in 2 months, that's coming out.
Should be, yeah. And the title of the book is When You're Going Through Hell, Keep Going.
Oh, amazing. Is there a quote that comes to mind as like your favorite spiritual quote on this subset of topics?
One I was going to look up, but I didn't. A guy named Thomas Traherne, who died in like 1650. He wrote this book about you do not see the world aright until, and then there are all these causes. And the first one is the sea itself flows through your veins.
Mm.
And then the stars in the sky at night are your crown.
Wow.
And I was thinking, this should be a discussion. This should be what therapists are aiming at. Not, you can go back to work at a soul-destroying job and tolerate it for another decade. He has a whole, it's a beautiful poetic passage, but I don't have it at my fingertips right now.
Okay. Maybe I could dig it up after our discussion and leave it in the notes for people to find.
Yeah.
But this seems to dovetail with what you were talking about before we started recording about this intersection between spirituality and psychotherapy and poetry, and all this stuff seems to be a really potent thing. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah. Can I read a poem?
Oh, that would be amazing.
Okay. I think this woman, I have to put reading glasses, computer glasses, writing glasses. Oh my God, it's ridiculous. I think this woman says it really well. Her name is Pesha Gertler. The Healing Time. Finally, on my way to yes, I bump into all the places where I said no to my life, all the unintended wounds, the red and purple scars, those hieroglyphs of pain carved into my skin, my bones, those coded messages that send me down the wrong street again and again, where I find the old wounds, the old misdirections, and I lift them one by one close to my heart. And I say, holy, holy.
I have goosebumps. Oh, that's beautiful.
It's a spiritual process. Hello, wake up. You can't heal that stuff without something very profound opening in you, I think.
Yeah. I lately I've been thinking of the spiritual component of therapy because I got exposed to this. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. I don't know how popular it is, but it's called community building. It was a method established by M. Scott Peck, maybe in the mid 80s, where you go and you sit in a group full of people and you use silence and you kind of get into this meditative state to see what is alive in you and you share it with others. And it sounds kind of basic and simple, but when you're there, there's this concept of this spirit of community coming in and going through you. And it takes you out of this individuated self into this more dividuated place that you write about in your book. And I felt this really deeply and profoundly when I just felt so connected and I existed as in this relational web, this deep relational web to others. And there aren't really words for it. It was something that was really felt. It wasn't something that was in the head, but this sense of something being therapeutic and psychotherapeutic and spiritual all in one. That's when I felt true healing happened.
Yeah. Daniel Siegel, the interpersonal neurobiology guy, gets this. And he also has put it in an incredibly rigorous, neuroscience kind of way. And he says we need a whole new language, that the idea that our brains are this encapsulated, isolated thing. I'm going to back up a little bit. I think the best description of the problem, or one of the best descriptions, comes from Tanya Luhrmann, a great anthropologist who is still alive. She says we in the West have what she calls the citadel model of mind. We think our mind is in this nice bony little structure we have up here. It's contained, it's private, everything in it is our property, and nothing, it's a fortress, it's a citadel. And this looks really strong and powerful, but it's not. It's very, very brittle and therefore very, very weak. And it also sets us up for all kinds of trouble. There are other writers who have traced this model of mind back to approximately the Reformation and Counter-Reformation. And a lot of disasters of our world since then have come out of it. But if you think about it, if you have this model of mind, this is alienation. And many people have, said that in the 20th century, 19th, 20th century, alienation is the core condition of modern man and the cause of all these other things. It's our belief about who we are as isolated beings. And where I started going down this track is Daniel Siegel. He says, this is so built into the grammar, the very grammar of our language, that we cannot think clearly. And he's trying to invent a new language. And I think it's quite clunky and awkward. He talks about mui, M with a we in parenthesis. And he says, well, it's not really an interpersonal relationship because we're not really separate. He's trying to talk about intrapersonal relationships. But I think these are just the beginnings in a really important direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Also, Isabel Clarke is someone that you mentioned in the book, and she talks about this pretty extensively as well. So I think there's momentum building. People are becoming more aware of this, and I'm excited. I hope that in my lifetime I start to see this change manifest itself, because it would be such an enormous paradigm shift.
Yeah, and it's part of the even larger paradigm shift of materialism, physicalism disappearing. And I think that one's coming, I think.
Can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, and I think Isabel Clarke is a very interesting person. She called it the billiard ball theory of mind. And she was not an anthropologist. She works in inpatient treatment of psychosis. And she saw it as something that really contributes to the suffering of psychotics in her wards. So this, I think it was Edmund Wilson who talked about consilience. When evidence from two completely separate fields comes to the same conclusion, he said that's one of the strongest indications that something is real. There's tremendous consilience about this idea of porosity of mind. Our minds are really porous. They're not these citadels, these fortresses. And if you just stop and think about it for a minute, we don't, because it's one of the most deeply embedded assumptions of the Western intellectual tradition. Every living system is porous. Every cell is surrounded by semi-permeable membranes. Every ecosystem has semi-permeable membranes around the net. Everything. Only stuff that's dead. It doesn't. Why would our minds be any different? It's almost like duh. Once you start thinking of it, we're really blind. We're astoundingly blind to something that's right here.
There was actually a quote that I wanted to read that you had written down on the porosity of mind that I thought beautifully articulated this. You said, "To be permeable and porous means we exist as completely embedded, inexorably engaged parts of a relational web with particular people, particular places, and particular things." And yeah, like to me, that's such a, to me, an obvious truth, but I guess not to everyone.
Yeah. A point that, it's really hard to get this through to people because it is so deeply embedded. A point that Daniel Siegel makes that I think if you follow its implications is really important. He says, the number one way we regulate our own internal mental emotional states is through relationships with others. And he says, this is undeniably, obviously true with a mother and infant. And he says, if you follow that path, it continues to be true. So all of that's I'm going to go off on another. One of my favorite thinkers is Ian McGilchrist. A stunningly brilliant man. And he does his homework. I do my homework, but boy, McGilchrist does his homework. It's an astounding scholar. And he says, I love this quote. It's a little bit gnomic. The relationship is prior to the relata. What he means is the interrelationship, the network between people, comes before the things that are related. It actually, in some ways, creates them. It's more important. That's where the reality is. He also says there are no things. Everything is process. Even Mount Everest, considered in a geological time frame, is a process. It's not a thing. So if you can bend your mind enough, it's actually a network. The really important things are the interconnections, and they, in a very significant way, create the things that are being interrelated, and it's all process. That's a very different way of thinking. It's almost painful to try and break out of the old shells and constrictions. And a lot of people find it quite threatening.
Yes, absolutely. I like where we're going with this, but I also wanted to get into your book a bit because we've been skirting and dancing around it. So would you want to talk a bit about what unattached burdens are, or guides, entities, whatever word we want to use for them?
Okay. Well, if you want to piss Dick off, say entities. He hates that word. He hates that word almost as much as he hates spirit possession. I don't know which one's worse. So in IFS, it's a parts work model. We have this self, the sun, and then all these different kind of parts inside us. And Dick realized, and this is brilliant, he really explored in detail what it means to take that seriously, that we're made up out of parts. And he followed out the implications, and that totally revolutionizes psychotherapy. I mean, a lot of the old things were just 180 degrees wrong. And what Dick did there, I think, is really brilliant. And his use of self in psychotherapy is also really, really brilliant. He now usually says he considers that his major contribution, the concept of self rather than the parts work stuff. But anyway, you go in enough, you get in there deep enough, you discover all the hurt parts and the protectors. There's other things in there that are not parts, and they're not self. And this upsets a lot of people. And there's a whole bunch of them. Legacy burdens, things from your family, cultural burdens. There's also what he now calls unattached burdens, which are the ones that used to be called spirit possession very often. There are also guides, which are benevolent energies of some kind that seem to come in. I also think there are things you can consider as past life experiences. I don't even know Dick's attitude. He's probably, flailing away here going, oh, I wish Bob would just shut his mouth. So if you think something I'm saying is ridiculous, blame it on me, and it's not IFS mainstream. So there's all this stuff in there that's not self or parts. Now, for most people, this is really bizarre thinking. And for rationalists, they can usually start with legacy burdens because there's hardcore scientific evidence that they exist now. There's epigenetics, and there's the Diaz-Ressler experiment. There's all this stuff. That happens. We can just send somebody to the references, and they'll get that. So then you go, oh, there's stuff in here that's not part of my personal life history. And that sort of, for many people, that cracks open the door to all these other things.
Mm-hmm. And in your work, how do you identify whether something is a part or whether it's something that isn't a part?
That's a really important question. And there's two major steps. The first one is, what is its intention? Parts always, no matter how bad they look on the surface, have a good intention. Suicidal parts are a classic example of this. You ask a suicidal, why do you want the person to die? Why do you want to kill this person? Well, then they'd be dead. What's good about their being dead? They wouldn't be on the planet anymore. What's good about their not, you just keep drilling down over and over again. And finally, the part will say something like, well, then they wouldn't be in so much pain. There's your good intention. And so you can join with the good intention. And what we typically would say in IFS is, if we had a way of getting the person out of pain that didn't involve killing them, what would you think of that? And the suicidal parts almost always say the same thing. It'd be great if you could do it, but you can't. And so we just say, hey, before you kill them, how about giving us a chance to prove to you that we really can do this? And that creates an opening. But if it's an unattached burden who's in there trying to kill the person, you'll keep drilling it. Well, what's good about their not being on the planet? And the thing will say something like, that'll mean I won. Or I get to feed on their spirit. Or some other really friendly, some other really, truly hostile. I was being a little sarcastic, trying to get over my sarcasm. So there won't be any good intention at all.
Okay.
And then once that's established, and that can take some time, that's not an easy question often. It's more subtle than it might seem. Then the next thing is to ask it directly. Are you a part of me? For some reason, they don't seem to be able to lie point blank about this. They'll evade the question. They'll say, well, I've been here a long time. Or, all sorts of lawyerly BS. But they don't seem to be able to lie about it. directly. So those are the two major ways.
Okay. And I guess listeners would probably be curious, okay, I understand what they are. I understand how to identify them. How do these things even get in the first place?
Okay. I just want to say, I focused on how to reduce the human suffering in front of me. And I tried to keep with a William James sort of radical pragmatism. Somebody sitting here in front of me suffering with this thing, I want to focus on that. And this, how do they get here in the first place, is sort of a little more theoretical. So it was a question I wanted to ask, but it came down the line. Usually, they're always attached to some part of the person. Usually, it's a very frightened, powerless child part. Took this thing in because it promised power to a powerless child. Like some kid being abused, and the thing comes in, well, I'm big and tough, And now Dick used to say it was always the offer of power to the powerless. It wasn't real power. It was an illusion of power, but even that much feels good to a little kid being raped. And I've come to believe they also offer companionship to the abandoned children. They also can get in whenever we're out of the body. Ironically, anesthesia, surgical anesthesia, very often lets these kinds of energies into a person. Now, I want to emphasize something that we don't see so much in therapy land. Most of people's experience of external energies, which is a phrase I use a lot now because I work a lot internationally, and I keep trying to look for the least theoretically encumbered phrase I could possibly have, So external energy, something outside of you that gets in. The vast majority of them are sought after and positive. If you look at the anthropological evidence, there are all these rituals and shamanic initiations where the people are devoting huge amounts of energy to inviting in these things. And we just tend to see them primarily as a negative and a problem, because many of us are therapists and we get people who are in trouble coming to us with the sort of more nasty ones. And I think this is really important to keep in mind. So IFS calls this, unattached burdens and guides. I think that's sort of unfortunate because you have to, just by your naming them, you're deciding them if they're good or bad right up front. Putting judgment in front is not my favorite. So Tanya Luhrmann has two wonderful phrases: spiritual presence experiences and spiritual presence events. Those are very neutral, and I appreciate that. I think that's very valuable.
Is there a distinction between the experience and the event, or are they synonyms?
I don't know. I think she's just changed her language. The earlier papers, it was experiences, and now it's more events. But okay. You'd have to ask her.
Okay. There was something you said that I wanted to go back to, though, about them gaining entrance or admittance when you're out of the body.
Mm-hmm.
When we're asleep, is this an open door? Because we're not technically in the body, right? When we're asleep.
Mm-hmm.
So I was curious, is this like a semi-permeable place where you're vulnerable to one of these energetic intrusions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just want psychedelic experiences, a lot of these things get in. I just want to definitely note that. Yes, and there's a very special kind of phenomena here. It's in the West, we refer to it as sleep paralysis.
Oh my God, I have this throughout my whole life. I suffer from this like a lot. So I'm very interested in what you're about to say now.
In Newfoundland and I think in Greenland and that whole North Atlantic area up there, they call it the old hag. And they say it's this old female spirit who comes and sits on your chest and tries to choke you to death and paralyzes your body, and you are not asleep nor are you awake.
That's exactly what it's like. Have you ever experienced it yourself?
No.
Okay, it is awful.
I had a lot of very vivid nightmare stuff, which is, also. So that's one very specific area where there's clearly some kind of energies of these sorts. See, it's so hard to find words that don't have a whole cultural framework built around them.
Yeah.
And if we've got that, it really impedes our ability to think clearly.
Yeah, when I've described this to friends who are curious about it, I describe it as some kind of malevolent, energetic entity because I don't know what words to use, but it's a distinct feeling of something there with me when it happens, and it is so eerie and unusual, and there is no waking experience short of perhaps psychedelic experiences I've had in the past that are anything remotely like it.
Yep. Well, you're not alone. I don't know if that makes you feel better or worse.
I was also wondering, in addition to sleep, like throughout my 20s, I had some problems with alcohol and I would routinely get blackout drunk. And I'm wondering, when you're blacked out drunk, is this also an open door because you are in an intoxicated, altered state where now you don't have these walls up anymore?
I think it could be. There are many people who have written and believe that when someone's an alcoholic, there are all sorts of unattached burdens that are also alcoholic that come and get in your body because they like getting that drunk.
Oh, wow.
So once you start down that road, you sort of attract a crowd of fellow travelers, or I don't know how you want to.
Yeah, because this was another thing in the book that I found really fascinating. Some cultures believe that these things can get in through sexual activity as well.
Rape almost literally often injects them, which is a horrible reality. I'm just cheering you right up, aren't I?
Well, actually, you know what? What you're saying reminds me of another thing I wanted to ask you that it stayed with me from the book because it was sort of haunting. You were talking about in Tibetan monasteries that there are kind of protector monks who are there to summon protective spirits and protect the Sangha. Because you use some quote that's beautiful that I will forever remember about you cannot turn on a light in the dark without attracting moths.
Yeah.
And when I read this, I just felt a chill down my spine because I was like, oh my God, why would it be that these spirits want to attack you when you're doing this healing work? I don't understand.
Well, first of all, empirically, staying with like the radical pragmatic thing, they do tend to attack healers a lot. They attack Dick, they attack me all the time. And I think they realize that if there's a lot of self in somebody's system, they don't get to stick around. And I think there's one tradition that calls these beings feeders. They're parasites of some strange kind. So, you're interfering. If there's a lot of self or light around, you're interfering with their farm.
Okay, this makes sense.
Yeah. For a while, I worked with this Lama, and he said that same thing about light and not at night in the summer in their body. And he said, "Well, they're just there." And he said, "But for me, they don't bother me anymore. They don't bother me. They just don't bother me. When I go to sleep, they're all around. They don't bother me. They don't bother." He was waving his hand with this grin and giggling.
That's interesting. And did he have an explanation on why they didn't bother him?
I think it's because he had enough stability in his practice, and he felt absolutely no fear of them. That is the key. These things get power inside of you by scaring you. If you're not scared of them, they lose all power. And they're really good at scaring you. I mean, if that's your only tool, you're going to get pretty good at using that tool.
Yes. there was another thing, and kind of related to this, in the healing aspect that I wanted to touch on a little bit, because recently I completed this 10-day silent meditation retreat, and it was great. It was difficult, but it has focused me on meditation and thinking about meditation. And there was a part in your book where you were discussing this inner witnessing that happens through mindfulness practices such as meditation, and there was this distinction that you made that it is not sufficient for healing in the liminal space to just witness. There needs to be compassion and active imagination. And I was wondering why it's necessary to interact in this space in order to promote healing.
Suppose you're out walking down the street and you see some little kid who's fallen down, who's terrified, who's screaming in panic with a scraped up knee. Now you could just sit there and stay calm yourself and observe the little kid. That's not compassion. Or you could go over, you could kneel down, get down on the little kid's level, go, hey, I got you, you're okay. Let's get you off the road. You're going to be okay. Oh, that must hurt. All the stuff you do. Which one's compassion? Sitting calm at the side of the road. I have sort of a snarky attitude sometimes, and I put a bunch of my guided meditations online, and I call them mindlessness meditations. Because whenever I'm in my mind, I know I'm in a dangerous neighborhood.
Yes, that was another quote that I loved from the book. That was a really good one. Yeah, that explanation makes sense. Because my initial thinking, maybe having been conditioned by the meditation retreat, was that in a way, acting is a kind of tacit rejection of what's happening in the system, and it's disempowering it. It's taking its agency because I'm rushing to fix it. But in your example, I wouldn't feel any of those things if I saw a hurt little kid. You would want to help. It's instinctive.
Yeah. And it's not even necessarily rush to fix. Now, that would be a quote in IFS language, a self-like part and all that, not good. But just offering compassion and companionship and sitting with it. You're not alone in this anymore.
And ironically, that's the recommendation for dealing with these burdens as well, is to kind of give them compassion and help them, which I find really beautiful.
For me, that's the biggest revolution between what Dick does most of the time, and I think I go substantially farther than he does on this. I think almost all of these things are lost. They're suffering. They're terrified. They're starving. They're trying to cling on to people because, they're just in this terrible, terrible suffering. And I'm working to help them too. The Spiritists of Brazil have done an immense amount of work in this area. And there are over 50 psychiatric hospitals in Brazil that have Spiritist healers in them. So it's, there's a lot going on in Brazil. We should study what's going on down there a lot more. But the Spiritists believe these are all lost souls, and they all just need our help. There aren't any that are just evil, evil, evil all the way down. Now, I'm not sure about that, but the overwhelming majority that I meet are like that. Even these ones that look incredibly bad when you meet them.
But it sounds like there are some cases where you're skeptical of whether or not the underneath they are just wounded souls.
Yeah, I don't know. Most of them will deny that. No, I'm not wounded. I'm way too strong to ever be wounded. I'm going to destroy you, you miserable worm. That would be a typical presentation.
Okay. And do these beings differ at all to DMT entities? Because I know this was another fascinating thing in the book, because people across cultures and times report similar beings and entities in these liminal spaces. And are these the same kind of spirits there, or is there kind of a multitude of different spirits in this DMT realm?
Great question. Again, I've stuck with, instead of these, category questions, I've stuck with the how questions. How can I help this person in front of me? But in the DM, there are a couple great large studies that came out of Johns Hopkins University under the leadership of the late Roland Griffiths, who I think was a unbelievably valuable scholar. And thousands of subjects in both of them. about 50-60% of the people who do DMT containing psychedelics meet conscious agentic beings, not things. The overwhelming majority of these are positive. Like by far the most common descriptor checked was guide, teacher, stuff like that. That's the overwhelming experience of these things. Some of them came across as horribly nasty. There's been a series of meetings at Tyringham Hall in England that are just focused on the entities people meet in psychedelic states. And there's at least one book out with the papers from one year of those meetings. Those are invitation-only meetings, and I'd love to get an invitation, but they've never invited me.
Well, fingers crossed that you can make it to the next one, because actually I see that on your website that there's an upcoming IFS-based psychedelic trip sitting workshop. I was wondering if you wanted to talk about that and maybe how it differs from a traditional one. Like what is the IFS spin?
Okay. If you want to know about IFS and psychedelics, I did I think it's 15, 16-hour class for Michael Patersky, the Life Architect group, and you can get recordings of that. And Dick Schwartz appears, and Michael Midhofer appears, and Dr. Bob Grant appears. And I think that's a really good introduction to basically how IFS deals with psychedelics. The class I will have coming up is organized with a group called LAMPS, Los Angeles Medicinal Psychedelic Society. And I've realized that if you've got 1,000 or so psychedelic experiences happening, 2 or 3 of them are going to be done with all the therapists and the licensed people and fully legal and all. It's just ridiculously expensive, horrendously, hideously, ridiculously. It prices most people out of the market. Then there's going to be another maybe 10-20% done with underground guides. Even there, because I've helped train a lot of these people, the average price in Northern California these days is about $2,000 for a session.
Wow.
Sometimes 3. It's a lot of hours, and it sort of makes sense. But the vast majority of sessions, psychedelic sessions, will be done friends sitting with friends. No training, nothing. Mm-hmm. So I'm trying to develop, along with LAMPS, we're trying to develop a training aimed at those vast majority of people to provide them cheap, basic, cheap knowledge that will prevent a lot of damage.
So it's like a harm reduction.
So that's a rather specialized kind of training, for a particular audience. And psychotherapy, if you look at it, traditional psychotherapy, at best, one-on-one, it's a linear progression, right? The suffering on the planet is going up probably exponentially. Now, hey, gang, this is not going to work. It's not even going to start working. We need something radically different. And so I've been working on these ideas of generative change as opposed to counteractive change. And I think there's models for how to work with this, but this is kind of off the subject of the book, but it's another, I think, super important.
Would you touch on that even briefly, on what you mean by generative change?
Okay. Counteractive change is like cognitive behavioral therapy. You've got this belief, I'm an idiot. So you say something over that. I'm smart. Now that'll work. But you have to keep saying, I'm smart, and drown out the I'm an idiot. And, that's counteractive. The best example I have of generative change is from one of the MAP studies of using MDMA with PTSD. Now, they get results way better than anybody else has gotten with anything. After one of their cohorts, which is 3 MDMA experiences and I think a dozen regular therapy experiences, 52% of the people no longer qualified for PTSD at all. Now that's way better than anyone gets. But the truly astounding thing is they tested these people again a year later, and 68% no longer qualified for PTSD. Some kind of seed was planted in these people that started a healing process that continued on its own. That's generative change. And I picked these guys because they got numbers and they did all the testing with all the APA approved measures and all that kind of garbage. But that's a really, really good example of generative change.
Okay. Cool. Thanks for adding some light there.
Yeah, and there's lots more about that, but that could be a whole discussion. Especially because I work overseas a lot. I work in Pakistan, China. The money is not there for the kind of one-on-one psychotherapy stuff. Just total non-starter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a kind of tragic. Improperly prioritized incentives in the world when we look at where the money is.
Oh, I want to say something else because this is one of Tanya Luhrmann's older studies. So she compared the outcome with florid psychotic episodes in San Mateo, California, Accra, Ghana, and Chennai, India. Now, here in California, we spend something on the order of 1,000 times more than either of those other two places. Guess who gets the worst results? We do. Now, if there was any rationality running this planet at all, we'd be over there at their feet studying what they do. That's not what's happening. We are obliterating their traditional ways of dealing with psychotic episodes, and we are exporting our ideas and methods. Especially in India, the government of India is actively working to destroy the traditional healing temples in the name of modernization and westernization. And Luhrmann, this was one of the studies that got her going with her citadel theory of mind. She says, the reason why we get these horrible results, we have this citadel theory of mind. And you hear a voice or you have a visionary experience, you think, oh my God, my brain's broken, And some psychiatrist, the Western witch doctor, comes along and says, yes, your brain is broken and it's not curable and you have to take these meds which will turn your brain into a jellyfish in 10 years and expect a miserable little life. Sorry. Oh, and by the way, the most emotionally powerful experiences of your life are totally meaningless. That's an incredibly destructive. This one African guy wrote a thing saying, this is the equivalent of a traditional African shaman's curse.
Wow.
But that's not in Luhrmann, that's me. Don't blame this on her. But in Accra, Ghana, she says the way they define self is cosmocentric. The self is seen embedded in the cosmos. There are nature spirits around, divinities, and there's that kind of relational thing. She said in Chennai, India, it's much more a sociocentric definition of self, where it's embedded in a family structure and spirituals and voices can be seen as relatives of some kind. So the psychotic experience is not so devastating. It's still devastating, but, and difficult. This was, I think, I shouldn't speak for her. I think this is one of the first big studies she did about the negative effects of the citadel theory of mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like there is a litany of negative effects from the citadel theory of mind.
Yeah, and there are a lot of, I really like this idea of consilience. There's a professor of philosophy emeritus at McGill University, Charles Taylor, and he talked about the buffered self. It's the same idea, and he says he started about 500 years ago, and it's destroying our culture totally. And Barbara Ehrenreich wrote a book on the end of communal joy, and she was looking at it not in terms of what we've created, but what we lost. We lost this ecstatic spirituality. And she points to the same time and she says, this is when they started writing books about melancholia. This is the roots of our modern epidemic of mental illness. And, it's also the first time we started having mirrors being a prominent part of every home.
Oh.
There's narcissism built into this whole new Citadel model, too.
Oh, wow.
Owen Barfield, the great Oxford guy who was Tolkien and C.S. Lewis's friend, he talked about original participation and final participation, and that we're in this phase of isolation. I could go on. I think this is super important.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this is something that I'm very interested in, and this topic of mirrors is also fascinating to me because in previous podcasts, this topic has become recurrent. There's a famous Argentinian writer, Jorge Luis Borges, who writes about mirrors and how they multiply infinity and multiply distortion, and it's very weird for the human to be so exposed to mirrors.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
And
maybe one of Tanya Luhrmann's more recent articles, I think it was from 22, she co-authored with someone, Porosity is the Heart of Religion, is the title of the article. And I think it is. That's how we have these experiences of something greater than us. And she wrote one of her books, which I think everybody on the planet should read. Sorry, that's pretty arrogant, but How God Becomes Real. And she talks about all the spiritual experiences which will open and develop this porosity in a good way. But religion is about experience. It's not about some dogma. People have these incredibly powerful experiences that can change their lives in one day. William James called these conversion experiences. And modern therapists ignore these totally. I think it's because it embarrasses us because we can't help our clients get that. We grind away for a decade with someone and get this much movement. And here, in a lot of spiritual contexts, people have these conversion experiences and their lives are totally changed in a day. So that's something else that needs to be paid attention to.
As you were speaking, I was thinking of a parallel where sometimes for me in nature it could serve this function of religion, where something has so much grandeur or splendor or something so unusual might happen. Maybe you see a shooting star and a rainbow at night or something crazy, and you're forever altered after having witnessed it.
Yep, definitely. One question I ask people when they say they've never had a spiritual experience, I said, have you ever seen something so beautiful that it brought tears to your eyes?
Yeah.
Almost the vast majority of people have had that experience. And I think that's a profoundly spiritual experience. I think Dick and IFS are brilliant with his concept of self because it sort of sneaks spirituality in the back door in a way that rationalists can't really argue with too much. And it opens these gates. Now, he's not too happy with me because I'm off here in the farther reaches exploring the weird stuff. He's afraid it will be used to discredit him. I think the 12-step movement has done something very similar. They say quite clearly that this is a spiritual practice. And I think what was brilliant in the way they did it that made it acceptable in the modern West is they just talked about a higher power. It gets it out of all that God language, and it makes it something that atheists can accept. And I've been very active in 12-step for much of my life, and you have someone who's a higher power. Blah. Go down to the beach and look out at the ocean. Hey, which one's bigger, you or the ocean?
Yeah, speaking of the ocean and speaking of nature and higher powers, environmental issues are an important part of this podcast to me. I'm wondering, Is there any intersection between your work and ecology or the environment?
I think if you really accept this idea that our minds are porous, that we're part of a network and a web, and what's out there is all our relations, it's not things, there's no such thing as a thing, you're going to treat it differently. If you view it that way, you can't trash it.
Yes.
So I think, and this is not an original idea with me. I think it comes out of Charles Taylor, but it might have been Owen Barfield. A lot of people have written about this. It's this kind of buffered mind, citadel theory of mind self that makes it possible for us to trash the planet. If we didn't have this in there, we couldn't behave this way.
Yes. I got goosebumps. That resonates very deeply with me. I feel exactly the same. And I wonder, similar to what you said earlier about what we've lost by kind of stamping out this spiritual element, I wonder about what we've lost by destroying so much of our ecology. So many species have gone extinct. The Amazon rainforest is being destroyed. The oceans are being poisoned. Like there's tremendous loss if we are this deeply connected web of relationships. Every time we destroy one of these things, we destroy a part of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, was that John Donne poem, "Ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee." You know, when someone's dying, yeah, you're dying. Every death, you die.
Well, I think death might be a good place to end this discussion, because I
to
know
have the
we're
podcast die.
Just because I want to respect your time, and I know we're about time right now, and I still have plenty of other things to ask. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your time at Esalen, but maybe this could be in a future discussion, or maybe in 2 months when the book of quotes come out. That would be a great time to chat as well.
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, you could go through and pick out some quotes you like, and we could talk about them.
Yeah, that would be amazing. That sounds really fun to me. But I just wanted to thank you for your time, for this book, for your work. I think what you do there is really important to help depathologize and destigmatize possession. In a way, exercising possession.
Yeah, and, I just one last word I want to say. I think the traditional exorcists and deliverance people made one big mistake, and that's fighting these beings. They like fighting. You know, they want to pick a fight with you. And if we can help them go with compassion, care, and kindness, much more powerfully than with fighting.
That touches my heart deeply, because that actually segues beautifully into how I wanted to end this podcast, where I kind of do like a meta minute, this practice of giving loving kindness to all beings, attached or unattached, we could say, and just having a moment of pause to just channel some empathy and compassion and love, instead of what's the usual combat and aggression and conflict, just to kind of bring that into the world. So if you'd like to join me just for
sure
a brief moment of silence. Thank you, Bob. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Been fun talking with you.